The Invisible Man takes a story that has been told and retold back to its roots. It's more than 2,600-year-old roots. Grace and peace. I'm Ryan, I'm the movie pastor, and let's hold on to the spoiler alert for a minute. This won't be a spoiler until later on in the video. I'll do no spoilers to begin with, because this concept of invisibility, man, we can talk for a long time about that before I even go into specific changes of the plot of the latest Invisible Man movie. That idea is so very theological. And better yet, it's literary. It has been engaged in all sorts of texts and all different ways of distributing texts for a very long time. So the most recent movie, the Blumhouse movie, the one that we're talking about today, is essentially a remake of the original Universal horror movie. Now, since that Universal horror movie, there have been other movies about invisible people, most notably The Hollow Man by Kevin Bacon. But it kind of ignores that and goes back and does a new take on the H.G. Wells book that the Universal horror movie was based on. But wait, we can't talk about the H.G. Wells book until we talk about some of the other books that have been written that exist in that context, that engage in that same Invisible Man discussion, notably Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man book and J.R.R. Tolkien's series of books that have to deal with an invisible man, that is Bilbo and Frodo Baggins, who have a ring that makes them invisible. All of these different people, all of these different perspectives are engaging with the concept of invisibility from different angles. For H.G. Wells, it had a lot to do with technology and the emergence of a changing world. For Ralph Ellison, it was about race. And for Tolkien, it was about sin. And it's the thing, the desire of our hearts, the precious, that allows us to escape the punishment for our actions. Well, all of these different writers, all of these different texts are engaging, of course, in a reference to a much older story. And that story is found in Plato's Republic. In that book, in that treatise, the Republic, Plato gives voice to a character named Glaucon, and Glaucon is talking about justice. Glaucon promotes egoism. He thinks that ultimately everyone should just do what is good for themselves. They should be selfish. And ultimately, there's no other option because they all are. Glaucon imagines a ring of Gyges, a ring that would allow both a just man and an unjust man to become invisible. And because they are invisible, their justice is not perceptible. He says, yeah, sometimes people are just, but the reason they're just is because they get credit for their justice. They get nobility, that people like them, people trust them. If you could get rid of all that, get rid of all the rewards of justice, get rid of all the consequences of injustice, someone would have to be an idiot if they had an invisibility ring and then they kept behaving justly. Well, Socrates disagrees with Glaucon. And Socrates in Plato's Republic says, let's forget about this, like, you've created this version of the character who's a just man, but when he puts on the ring, he doesn't want to be just anymore. Let's let the just person be totally just, and the unjust person be totally unjust. And a totally just person means even when he puts a ring on, he wants to behave justly. And you tell me at the end of their lives which person is more happy. Even if the just person gets no credit for their actions and gets regarded universally as unjust, you tell me who's going to be more happy. Man, what theological content that is. Socrates had a bunch to say that communicates directly to Christianity. For one thing, where do we find this just person? Where do we find someone who is so totally just that they can't be corrupted? That even when there are no consequences, not even like social reputational consequences, they want to do what's right no matter what. Socrates himself was a pretty just guy, but if we want a perfectly just guy, I think we've got to look to the man on the cross. We've got to look to Jesus Christ, who lived a just life and yet was derided and accused and made into a capital criminal. So we're talking about that, but we're also talking about, in Glaucon's perspective, sin nature, and the fact that, hey, if we have this universal human experience where, given the chance to get away with something, we will, then that says something about what humans are and what we're about. And again, this is a guy who's never read the Bible. This is a guy, I mean, neither Plato, who wrote the Republic, nor Glaucon, who might not even have existed, have any awareness of like Christian theology, but you and I hear that, and I mean, that's total depravity, baby. That's all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and we're engaging it in this book that comes before the New Testament. So Tolkien, of course, is going to engage that ring idea. He's going to use the idea of the Ring of Gyges as part of telling his tale of the Lord of the Rings, which has this deep symbolism. H.G. Wells is pulling upon it, and this Blumhouse movie pulls upon it as a way to talk about domestic abuse. What does it mean to hide the evidence of domestic abuse and to make the person you're abusing feel crazy, to gaslight them and to damage their relationships with other people through your abuse? How do they feel? What's the psychological torment of that? And what's interesting is that when Glaucon talks about Gyges, he is referencing an even earlier story. We can't go back to ancient Greece. That's not far enough. We have to reach farther still into ancient Lydia, where the first story of the Shepherd of Gyges is found. It's recorded in a text by Herodotus, where he talks about this man, Gyges of Lydia, who's a friend of the king, and he is not invisible, he's hidden. In the first version of the story, he hides. He hides behind a door, or, it depends on translation. And the reason he does this is because the king would like to have Gyges see his wife naked. The first use, literary, of invisibility is to abuse a woman. The first time we talked about a person who had the power to avert consequences by not being seen, we talked about it in the context of taking someone's wife and violating her privacy. So what a interesting move for Blumhouse to make a horror movie now that engages with this universal experience, this thing that we're talking about so much now. I have seen so many movies lately that have to do with abusing women, right? Black Christmas had to do with that. Bombshell, Charlie's Angel, so many of the movies I've seen since I started have to do with abusing women. And we are engaging a story that is from about 650 BC that this guy Gyges would have lived to talk about what abusing women looks like with invisibility. Well, now let's talk about spoilers. Let's get into the spoiler content, because by the end of this movie, by the time we have dealt with the horror of having someone who is near you, who is able to avoid consequences and able to make you look like the crazy one because you can't prove it to anybody, we get a moment where Elizabeth Moss's character gets access to invisibility herself. And there's a just person and there's an unjust person, and they both have the ability to become invisible. What then do we do? What happens then? I think the movie actually leaves that up to our interpretation. I mean, she kills the person who is tormenting her, right? She stops the violence, she stops the abuse by perpetuating violence herself. But after that, as she's walking out and she's got the invisibility suit in a bag and she's got that smirk on her face, do you think the world is safe? Do you think she is okay because she's a good person and so she can handle impunity? She can get away with the ability to not suffer consequences for her actions? Or could we make a sequel, The Invisible Woman, in which she is just as dangerous as he ever was? Well, your answer to that really depends on whether you agree with Glaucon or agree with Socrates. Socrates would say we're okay. She's fine now. She's gonna be just, because justice is its own reward and people work towards their self-interest, but their self-interest is served when they act justly. Glaucon would say, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and she's gonna go off, and you gotta watch out. I think the movie's really, really well made in the fact that by the end of it, you're not even sure she's right. I mean, we assume she is because she's just been right about everything so far. All of her guesses had been true, but what if it was always the brother? And what if what the husband said, I mean, we don't see him manipulate. We just hear the brother and her talk about his manipulation. What would happen if he was guilty of being a bad husband, but innocent of murder, and she killed him and made it look like a suicide, and now she, who's a little bit unhinged, and she's understandably unhinged, sympathetically unhinged, but still unhinged, now has impunity in her handbag. She has the ability to go invisible. Can anybody be trusted with invisibility? Can anybody be trusted with a freedom from reputational consequences? Is there anyone just enough to understand that goodness is its own reward? Well, that's a question for you. I really want to thank you for waiting until the end of this video. So I want to pray a blessing over you in lieu of begging for likes and subscribes. God, for all the people who watch this video, even the ones who don't know you as God but might know you as the center of the universe or something else, I want to ask you to help them to avoid the full consequences of their actions. We know that actions have consequences, but we also know that if we suffer for all of our actions, we are in deep trouble because we so often don't choose justice, and our not choosing justice causes suffering for us and others. So protect us. Give us at least some level of impunity, though perhaps not so much impunity that we go completely off the rails. Amen.
And when in scenes of glory I sing the new song, 'twill be the old story that I have loved.